The fluorescent hallway lights of St. Mary's Hospital hummed their usual monotone symphony as Michael Reynolds stood outside Suite 12, his heart hammering against his rib cage. His weathered hands, calloused from years of gripping mop handles and pushing industrial cleaning equipment, trembled slightly as they clutched a small glass jar. It was 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. Behind that door lay Alexandra Harrington, CEO of Harrington Biotech, one of the most powerful women in Massachusetts, dying. And he, a 40-year-old night shift janitor, was about to walk in there with something that could either save her life or get him arrested. His uniform suddenly felt too tight around the collar. The jar felt impossibly heavy. What am I doing? But then he remembered watching her through the partially open door just last week. She had been sitting alone at 3:02 a.m., trying to work on her laptop despite the bandages wrapped around her hands. The sound of her crying, deep, sorrowful sobs that echoed the kind of grief he knew too well. Her whispered words to herself, "I built my company to help people. Now I can't even help myself." Michael raised his hand and knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Victoria Morgan stood there, a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her eyes narrowed the instant she saw him. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp as a scalpel. "This is a private room. Michael's throat went dry. "I wanted to speak with Ms. Harrington." "About what?" "The floors?" Victoria's tone dripped with contempt. She positioned herself squarely in the doorway, a human barrier. "It's almost 3 in the morning. Get out immediately or I'm calling security." "Victoria, wait." The voice from inside was weak, barely above a whisper. "What is it you want?" Michael tried to see past Victoria's shoulder. "Ma'am, I know how this looks." "Oh, I'm sure you do." Victoria's hand moved to her phone. "A janitor showing up in the middle of the night with who knows what in a jar. This is completely inappropriate. I'm calling security right now, please." Michael's voice gained strength. "I've watched Ms. Harrington suffer for weeks. I've seen the doctors fail one after another, and I have something that might help." Victoria actually laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound that made Michael's face flush. "Are you serious right now? You have something that might help? You, a janitor, have solved what the best medical minds in the world couldn't?" She turned her head slightly toward the room. "Alexandra, this is absurd. He's probably trying to sell some snake oil. Security will—" "It's not snake oil." Michael's jaw clenched. "It's a remedy that saved my daughter's life when she had a condition that destroyed her skin. When the doctors gave up." "Oh, please. Every charlatan has a story. Every scammer preys on desperate people." "Alexandra, I'm calling security now. This man is clearly—" "Show me." Both Michael and Victoria turned to look toward the bed. "Alexandra, you can't be serious." Victoria's voice rose in pitch. "This man is a nobody. He cleans floors. He probably got this concoction from some internet conspiracy site. You've had Nobel Prize winners examining you, and you're going to listen to— Show me what you brought." Alexandra's voice was stronger now, cutting through Victoria's objection. He held up the small jar. Through the glass, a golden substance caught the light. "It's a specific mixture of calendula extract from flowers grown in alkaline soil, colloidal oatmeal ground to exact fineness, raw honey from bees that fed on specific wildflowers, and lavender oil from plants grown in mineral-rich soil with particular pH levels. But the key is in how it's prepared and where the ingredients come from." Victoria scoffed loudly. "Honey and oatmeal. This is ridiculous. Alexandra, your immunologist from Harvard prescribed cutting-edge biologics designed in a laboratory. And this janitor thinks honey is the answer? The biologics nearly killed me, Victoria." The quiet statement hung in the air. "That's different," Victoria shot back. "That was real medicine, not some grandmother's recipe from a man who probably didn't even graduate high school." The words hit their mark. Michael's face flushed deeper, but he held his ground. "You're right, I didn't finish college. I clean your floors and empty your trash." His voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. "But I also held my wife's hand while she died from something doctors couldn't fix. I know what it's like to watch someone slip away while experts shake their heads. And I know what it's like to see a miracle when my daughter's skin healed after everyone said it was impossible. This is emotional manipulation. Victoria turned fully toward the bed now. He's playing on your desperation. Alexandra, please let me call security. This is dangerous. He could be mentally unstable. The jar could contain anything. Victoria, Alexandra's voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. Look at his eyes. What? Look at his eyes. Look at his hands. Victoria glanced at Michael dismissively. I don't see. His hands are shaking, but not from fear. From hope. From the weight of what he's about to do. There was a pause. Then Alexandra continued. He knows he could lose his job for this. He knows we could have him arrested, but he came anyway. I've seen 1,000 doctors in the last 6 weeks, Victoria. Every one of them looked at me like a puzzle to solve, like a challenge to their ego, like a case study for a medical journal. Another pause. This man, he's looking at me like a person who's suffering. That doesn't mean his jar of goop will help. Victoria's voice cracked slightly. Tell me, Alexandra said to Michael, why did you really come here tonight? Michael met her swollen, barely visible eyes. Even from across the room, he could see the angry red welts covering her face, the scales that had replaced what was once beautiful skin. But he could also see something else, a desperate, flickering hope. Because I couldn't sleep anymore, he said quietly, knowing I might have something that could help and doing nothing about it. Because every night when I clean this floor, I hear you crying when you think no one's listening. He swallowed hard. Because I know what it's like to feel helpless, ma'am, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone. 5 years ago, Michael Reynolds had been a different man. He'd worked construction during the day, attended medical school at Harvard in the evenings, came home to his pregnant wife Sarah at night, and dreamed about the family they were building. They'd picked out names, painted the nursery pale yellow, argued playfully about whether their daughter would have his eyes or hers. Then Sarah went into labor and everything changed. The complications started small, just some unusual bleeding. Then her blood pressure spiked. Then her organs began failing one by one. The doctors ran tests, administered treatments, brought in specialists. Nothing worked. It was as if her body had turned against itself in ways they couldn't understand. The HELP syndrome, they'd called it, a rare variant that progressed with unusual speed. Sarah had held baby Emma once, just once, long enough to whisper, "Take care of our girl," before the machine started screaming. Michael had buried his wife on a Tuesday, dropped out of medical school the following Monday. He needed health insurance for Emma, needed a steady paycheck, needed to keep moving because if he stopped, the grief would swallow him whole. His father had been a mechanic who worked with his hands his entire life. For all his dreams of becoming a doctor, maybe this was always where Michael was meant to end up, pushing a mop, collecting trash, cleaning up after people who rarely noticed he existed. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking," Michael said now, still standing in the doorway with Victoria glaring at him. "How long have you been sick?" Alexandra's voice was hoarse. 6 weeks. It started as a rash on my arms, minor irritation. I thought it was stress, maybe an allergic reaction to new soap, a bitter laugh. Within days, it spread. Now 60% of my body is covered. The pain is indescribable, like my skin is on fire every second of every day. And the doctors? 500 consultations. Specialists from Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins. Physicians from Switzerland, Japan, Australia. Her voice cracked. 43 different treatments. Each one either did nothing or made me worse. The steroids shut down my kidneys. The immunosuppressants triggered seizures. Simple antihistamines sent me into anaphylactic shock. Victoria interjected, her voice defensive. "We've tried everything. The best minds in the world have examined her. This isn't something a janitor with a jar of kitchen ingredients can fix." But Michael had stopped listening to Victoria. He was remembering. Emma had been 6 months old when the eczema started. Tiny red patches on her cheeks that spread within days to cover her entire body. She'd screamed through the nights, her baby skin raw and bleeding where she'd scratched it. The pediatrician prescribed steroid creams that did nothing. The dermatologist suggested elimination diets, special formulas, hypoallergenic everything. Nothing worked. Michael had been at his breaking point, exhausted from Emma's screaming, from sleepless nights, from watching his daughter suffer, when his elderly neighbor, Martha Wilson, had knocked on his door. Martha was in her 80s, a Polish immigrant who'd lived on their floor for 40 years. She'd heard Emma crying through the walls. "My grandmother had a remedy," she'd said in her thick accent, pressing a yellowed index card into Michael's hand. "For skin, that medicine cannot help. You try." Desperate, Michael had tried. The recipe was specific. Calendula extract from flowers grown in alkaline soil, colloidal oatmeal ground to exact fineness, raw honey from bees that fed on specific wildflowers, and lavender oil. But not just any lavender oil. It had to come from plants grown in mineral-rich soil with particular pH levels. Martha had been adamant about the preparation method too. The ingredients had to be combined at exact temperatures in a specific order, and it had to be prepared during a new moon, something Michael had dismissed as superstition, but he'd followed every instruction anyway. Within 3 days, Emma's skin had started healing. Within a week, it was completely clear. The pediatrician was baffled. The dermatologist had no explanation. Michael had kept that index card in his wallet ever since. A reminder that sometimes the answers came from unexpected places. "This is insane." Victoria's voice pulled Michael back to the present. "Alexandra, you're going to trust your life to a janitor's home remedy? What will the board say? What will the medical teams say when they find out? What have they done for me, Victoria?" There was steel in Alexandra's weak voice now. 500 doctors, millions of dollars, and I'm still dying. My skin is on fire every second of every day. I haven't slept in 3 weeks. I'm 35 years old, and I'm planning my funeral." Silence filled the room. "Tell me about your daughter's condition," Alexandra said to Michael. So he did. He explained Emma's eczema, the failed treatments, Martha's remedy, the specific ingredients, and why they mattered. He talked about how calendula had anti-inflammatory properties, how colloidal oatmeal was actually FDA approved for treating skin conditions, how raw honey provided antimicrobial effects. Victoria paced the room, periodically scoffing and rolling her eyes, but Alexandra listened intently, her scientific mind engaging despite her pain. "The lavender oil," Alexandra said slowly. "You mentioned specific soil conditions, mineral-rich with particular pH levels. That could theoretically affect the chemical composition of the essential oils produced by the plant. You're actually considering this?" Victoria was aghast. "What else do I have to consider?" Alexandra's voice rose slightly. "Another team from Berlin to tell me they've never seen anything like this? More steroids that shut down my organs? More nights wondering if I'll wake up tomorrow. But he's nobody." Victoria gestured at Michael's uniform, her face flushed with frustration. "And maybe," Alexandra said slowly, each word deliberate, "that's exactly why he can see what everyone else missed. Sometimes the answer isn't in making things more complex. Sometimes it's in remembering simplicity." Michael placed the jar gently on the bedside table. His hands had stopped shaking. "I'll leave it here, ma'am. The instructions are taped to the side. If you decide not to use it, I understand completely. I had to try." He turned to leave. "Wait." Michael stopped, his hand on the doorframe. "If I use this, will you come back tomorrow night to see if it worked?" Victoria made a sound of complete exasperation, but Michael ignored her. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply. "I'll come back." Alexandra Harrington had built her billion-dollar pharmaceutical empire from nothing. The daughter of a Harvard professor, she'd been expected to follow the safe academic path, get her PhD, publish papers, secure tenure. Instead, she dropped out of her doctoral program to pursue a wild idea about developing treatments for rare diseases. Her parents had been horrified. Her professors had called it career suicide. But Alexandra had known something they didn't: what it felt like to watch someone you love die from a condition no one cared enough to study. Her sister Melissa had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder at 15. Melissa died at 17 not from the disease itself, but from complications of experimental treatments that were their only option. No major pharmaceutical company would invest in research for a condition that affected fewer than 10,000 people worldwide. The economics didn't make sense. So Alexandra had promised herself she would change the economics. She'd started Harrington Biotech in a converted garage with a second-hand centrifuge and 3 employees. 15 years later, her company employed over 5,000 people and had brought 7 groundbreaking treatments to market. She was featured on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. She gave TED Talks about disrupting the pharmaceutical industry. She sat on panels at Davos. And now she was dying in the most exclusive hospital suite money could buy, her body destroying itself in ways the best medical science couldn't explain. Her symptoms had started with what looked like a simple allergic reaction: red, itchy patches on her forearms. Her personal physician had prescribed a steroid cream. When that didn't work, they'd moved to oral steroids, then to immunosuppressants. Each treatment had either failed to help or made things catastrophically worse. The diagnosis had finally come 3 weeks ago: Stevens-Johnson syndrome, but an unusual variant that seemed to progress more slowly and resist all standard interventions. Her skin was sloughing off in places. Painful blisters covered much of her body. Her internal organs were beginning to show signs of distress. The prognosis was grim. Victoria Morgan had been her assistant for 12 years, the only person who had been with her from the early days of the company. Victoria had been with her through each step of this nightmare, coordinating with doctors, managing the board's concerns, keeping the press at bay. If Alexandra was the head of Harrington Biotech, Victoria was its spine. After Michael left, Victoria immediately launched into a tirade. "This is the most irresponsible thing you've ever done. A janitor, Alexandra, a complete nobody with some jar of who knows what. The media will have a field day if they find out the CEO of a pharmaceutical company resorted to—" "Victoria," Alexandra's voice cut through the rant, "in all your concerns about appearances and protocols and what people will think, did you notice something?" "What?" "He never asked for money, never mentioned a reward, didn't even ask me to try it. He just left it here and said he understands if I don't use it." Victoria fell silent, her mouth opening and closing without sound. 500 doctors, and not one of them looked at me the way that man just did. Like I was a person, not a medical mystery, not a challenge to their reputation, just a person who's suffering. The room fell quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. "I'm going to try it," Alexandra continued. "Just a small amount on one patch of skin. If it makes things worse, we'll know immediately. But if it helps, Victoria, if it helps even a little." That night, despite Victoria's continued protests, Alexandra carefully applied a small amount of the remedy to a patch of affected skin on her forearm. The texture was smooth, the scent gentle, lavender and honey. Within minutes, the incessant burning sensation began to ease. Not much, just enough to be noticeable. Michael returned home just as the sun was rising, his mind replaying the encounter in Suite 12. His apartment was small, a 2-bedroom unit in a weathered building in Dorchester, a working-class neighborhood far from the gleaming towers of downtown Boston where Alexandra lived and worked. His mother, Elena, was already up, making coffee in the kitchenette. At 72, she still insisted on being the one to get Emma ready for preschool, allowing Michael to sleep a few hours after his night shift. "How was work?" Elena asked in the quiet way she had, always careful not to pry too deeply. "I did something stupid, Mom. Something that might cost me my job." Elena's hands stilled on the coffee pot. She didn't look surprised, more resigned, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "What happened?" Michael explained about Alexandra Harrington, about Martha's remedy, about breaking every hospital protocol by entering a patient's room uninvited, offering unsanctioned treatment. As he spoke, his mother's expression shifted from concern to something like pride. "You did what your father would have done," she said finally. "What your grandfather would have done. When you see someone suffering and you can help, you help. Job or no job. But if I lose this position, then you find another." Elena's voice was firm. "We survived when Sarah died. We survived when you left medical school. We will survive this too." She touched his face, her hand cool against his skin. "You are still the boy who wanted to be a doctor to help people. Even if you mop floors now, that hasn't changed." In the bedroom down the short hallway, Emma stirred. Michael heard the soft patter of her feet on the worn carpet. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway, her curly hair a wild tangle around her face. She was clutching the stuffed rabbit she'd had since birth, the one Sarah had picked out before she was born. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him and he caught her, lifting her high into the air before bringing her down for a hug. "You're home early, just for a little while, Peanut. I have to go back tonight." Emma's face fell slightly, but she recovered quickly. The resilience of children never ceased to amaze him. Did you bring me anything? It was their little game. Sometimes he'd bring her a pebble from the hospital parking lot, or a paper crane folded by a patient's visitor, or a flower plucked from the hospital garden. Today, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small origami star he'd made from the wrapper of a drinking straw. "A star for my star," he said, placing it in her tiny palm. Emma examined it closely, then carefully added it to the collection on her bedroom windowsill. "Can we have pancakes? It's cereal day, Emma," Elena reminded her gently. "Pancakes are for weekends." Emma pouted but didn't argue. "Can I wear my dinosaur shirt? It's in the wash, sweetheart." "How about the butterfly one?" As Elena led Emma back to her room to get dressed, Michael collapsed onto the couch. The adrenaline that had carried him through his encounter with Alexandra was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. He should sleep. He had to be back at the hospital by 10 p.m., but his mind wouldn't settle. Would Alexandra actually try the remedy? Would it help her as it had helped Emma? Or would he arrive tonight to find security waiting to escort him from the premises? His employee badge confiscated, his livelihood gone. 5 years ago, when he'd been forced to drop out of medical school, Michael had felt like his life was ending. He'd been 3 years into the program, maintaining a 3.8 GPA despite working construction during the day and caring for a newborn at night. His professors had praised his clinical instincts. His fellow students had respected his work ethic. And then Sarah had died, and the carefully constructed architecture of their future had collapsed. The grief had been paralyzing at first. For weeks, he'd moved through the world like a ghost, going through the motions of caring for Emma, but not really present. It was Elena who had saved them both, moving in without being asked, taking over when Michael couldn't function, gently but firmly pushing him back toward life. The medical school had been understanding but inflexible. They'd offered him a leave of absence, but without Sarah's income as a paralegal, Michael couldn't afford the tuition. His construction job didn't provide health insurance, which Emma desperately needed. So he'd done what he had to do, found a position at St. Mary's that offered benefits and required no degree, working nights so Elena could watch Emma and he could be with her during the day. It wasn't the life he'd planned, it wasn't the future he and Sarah had dreamed about, but it was a life. And most days, that was enough. The janitor's position came with unexpected benefits. Michael moved invisibly through the hospital, observing procedures and treatments that most people never saw. He'd maintained his subscription to medical journals, reading them during his breaks, keeping his knowledge current even though he'd never practiced medicine. Sometimes, when the surgical floor was quiet, he'd stand outside the glass walls of the operating theaters, watching the surgeons work, imagining himself in their place. The doctors rarely noticed him. He was just another uniform, another anonymous support staff member who kept the hospital running. But the nurses saw him. They noticed how he sanitized the isolation rooms more thoroughly than protocol required, how he knew which cleaning agents were safe for medical equipment, how he sometimes corrected the positioning of monitors or equipment that had been hastily moved. Nurse Martinez had been the first to start asking his opinion. She'd found him one night reading a journal article about new approaches to treating MRSA infections. Instead of mocking him, she'd asked what he thought of the methodology. Their conversation had led to others. Soon, a small network of nurses would seek him out during his shifts, discussing cases, asking questions about articles he'd read. It wasn't medicine, but it was adjacent to it. It kept that part of him alive. And now he'd risked it all for Alexandra Harrington, a woman he'd never spoken to before tonight, a woman who existed in a world entirely separate from his own. Michael didn't realize he'd fallen asleep until Elena gently shook him awake. "It's nearly 5, she said. "I thought you'd want to have dinner with Emma before you go back to work." He rubbed his eyes, disoriented. "Is she home from preschool already?" Elena smiled. "It's nearly evening, Michael. You've been asleep for hours. Emma's doing her alphabet worksheets at the table." He stood, stretching muscles stiff from the awkward position on the couch. "Sorry, Mom, I should have helped with her pickup." Elena waved away his apology. "I raised you, didn't I? I can handle one 4-year-old for a few hours. Besides," she added with a small smile, "you had an important errand this morning." Michael felt a rush of gratitude for his mother's quiet understanding. She never pushed, never demanded explanations, but was always there, solid as bedrock. In the kitchen, Emma sat at the small table, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration as she carefully traced the letter M. Her dark curls, so like Sarah's, fell across her forehead. When she saw Michael, her face lit up. "Daddy, look what I did!" She held up the paper, showing him rows of wobbly but recognizable letters. "That's amazing, Peanut. Your M's are perfect." "They're the most important," she informed him seriously, "because M is for Michael and Mommy and Emma." "And meatballs," Michael added, moving to the refrigerator, "which is what we're having for dinner." Emma clapped her hands in delight. "With spaghetti? Is there any other way?" By the time Michael arrived at the hospital that night, his stomach was in knots. He changed into his uniform in the staff locker room, nodding to the other night shift workers. Jose from Environmental Services, Denise from Central Supply, Wei from the lab. They were a different breed, the night shift workers. They saw the hospital in ways the daytime staff never did. Quieter, more intimate, more vulnerable. He began his usual routine, restocking paper towels in bathrooms, emptying trash cans, mopping floors. He saved the executive wing for last, his anxiety building with each passing hour. When he finally pushed his cart down the silent hallway toward Suite 12, his mouth was dry, his palms damp. Would she be waiting for him? Would she be worse? Would Victoria have already reported him? He knocked softly on the door, holding his breath. This time, Victoria opened it without hostility. Her expression was complicated, confusion, wonder, and something that might have been the beginnings of respect. "She wants to see you," Victoria said quietly, stepping aside. Michael entered, his heart racing. Alexandra was sitting up slightly in bed, and even from across the room he could see the difference. The patch of skin where she'd applied the remedy looked dramatically better. The angry red had faded to pink. The scaling had diminished. "It worked," Alexandra said, her voice stronger than the night before. "Mr. Reynolds, it actually worked." "Michael," he said automatically. "Please, just call me Michael." "Michael," she smiled. The first real smile Victoria had seen in weeks. "I applied it to larger areas this morning. Same results. The pain is less. The burning has stopped in those spots. It's like my skin is remembering how to be skin again." He approached the bed cautiously, examining the treated areas with a practiced eye. The improvement was undeniable. The inflammation had receded significantly. The scaling was softening. There was no evidence of further irritation or allergic response. "I need to understand how this works," Alexandra continued. "The composition seems simple, but there must be something in the preparation or the sourcing that makes it effective." Victoria's been taking notes, documenting everything. Victoria held up a tablet where she'd been meticulously recording observations, times of application, measurements of the affected areas, photographs showing the progression of healing. It was exactly the kind of rigorous documentation Michael would have expected from a clinical trial. "I don't fully understand it myself," Michael admitted. "Martha, my neighbor who gave me the recipe, she insisted it had to do with the specific growing conditions of the plants and the preparation method. The calendula has to be grown in alkaline soil with a pH above 7.5. The lavender needs mineral-rich soil, particularly high in magnesium and zinc. The honey has to come from bees that feed primarily on wildflowers with specific properties." "It sounds like folk wisdom," Victoria interjected, "but I've been researching. There's actually really scientific literature supporting some of these requirements. Plants grown in different soil conditions produce different phytochemical profiles. The therapeutic properties of honey vary widely depending on what the bees feed on." She sounded reluctant to admit it, but professional enough to acknowledge the evidence. "Traditional knowledge often has a basis in scientific fact," Michael said carefully. "People observed what worked over generations, even if they didn't understand the mechanisms." Alexandra was watching him intently. "You sound like you know something about medicine." Michael hesitated. "I was in medical school, Harvard. I had to drop out after my wife died." Victoria's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but Alexandra simply nodded as if confirming something she'd already suspected. "That explains a lot," she said. "Why didn't you mention it last night?" "Would it have mattered?" Michael asked. "Would you have been more likely to try the remedy if I'd told you I had 3 years of incomplete medical training instead of just being the guy who mops your floor?" Alexandra considered this. Probably, she admitted, which says something rather unflattering about me, doesn't it? It says something about human nature, Michael corrected gently. We trust credentials because they're an easy shorthand for expertise, but they're not the only measure of knowledge. Victoria cleared her throat. This is all very philosophical, but we have practical matters to discuss. The doctors will be here for rounds in the morning. They're going to notice the improvement. We need to decide what to tell them. We tell them the truth, Alexandra said firmly. Victoria looked aghast. That you're using an untested folk remedy provided by a janitor? Alexandra, the liability issues alone, that I'm participating in an alternative treatment protocol with promising initial results, Alexandra interrupted. We don't need to mention Michael's employment status. They're going to ask questions, Victoria warned. They're going to want to know exactly what's in the treatment, who developed it, what research supports it. Then we'll need answers, Alexandra turned to Michael. Could your neighbor, Martha was it, speak with my research team? Could you provide detailed information about the sourcing of these ingredients? We need to document everything properly if we're going to validate this as a legitimate treatment. Michael felt a twinge of unease. Martha was 84 years old and spoke English with a heavy Polish accent. Her knowledge wasn't the kind that came with citations and peer-reviewed studies. It was passed down through generations, modified by experience, verified by results rather than clinical trials. Would Harrington Biotech's research scientists listen to an elderly immigrant with a fifth-grade education? I can ask her, he said cautiously. But she's traditional. She might not be comfortable with corporate researchers questioning her. Alexandra seemed to understand his concern. What if we started with just having her speak with you and me? We could record the conversation, have it transcribed. That way, we capture her knowledge directly, in her own words, before involving the broader team. The consideration surprised him. He'd expected Alexandra Harrington to be more like the imperious figure he'd seen on magazine covers, driven, demanding, impatient with anything that slowed her progress. Instead, she was showing a sensitivity he hadn't anticipated. That might work, he agreed. I could ask her tomorrow. Good, Alexandra nodded decisively. In the meantime, could you bring more of the remedy? We're using it up quickly with the expanded application. Michael hesitated. I'd need to make more. The preparation takes time, and some of the ingredients are hard to find. Whatever you need, Alexandra said immediately. Victoria can arrange for anything. Special ingredients, equipment, time off work. Time off work caught Michael by surprise. You want me to stop working as a janitor? Alexandra studied him for a moment. Michael, if this remedy continues to work the way it has so far, it could help countless people with conditions similar to mine. That's more valuable than any amount of floor mopping. Victoria, arrange for Michael to be seconded to my personal staff immediately. Full salary continuation, plus a consulting fee commensurate with medical researcher rates. Victoria looked like she wanted to object but held her tongue. Of course. I'll take care of it first thing in the morning. Michael felt dizzy. 12 hours ago, he'd been terrified of losing his job. Now Alexandra was offering to pay him as a medical researcher, a role he'd trained for but never completed, a world he'd thought was closed to him forever. I don't know what to say, he managed finally. Say yes, Alexandra replied simply. Help me understand why this works. Help me make it available to others who need it. The magnitude of what was happening crashed over Michael. This wasn't just about helping one person anymore. It wasn't even about keeping his job or providing for Emma. This was about the possibility of returning to the path he'd been forced to abandon, the chance to contribute to medicine after all, even without the degree, even without the credentials. But there was a voice in the back of his mind, cautioning him. The remedy had worked for Emma. It seemed to be working for Alexandra, but it was still untested by conventional standards. What if there were long-term effects they couldn't predict? What if it worked for these specific cases but proved dangerous for others? The responsibility felt suddenly overwhelming. I need to think about this, he said honestly. I need to talk to my mother about the childcare implications, and I'd want to speak with Martha before making any commitments. Alexandra nodded, respecting his caution. Take 24 hours. But Michael, her voice grew serious. Whatever you decide about the research position, please don't stop bringing the remedy. Not until I'm fully healed. There was vulnerability in the request that touched something in Michael. Behind the power and the privilege, Alexandra Harrington was just a woman fighting to survive, grasping at the hope he'd offered her. "I'll bring more tomorrow," he promised, no matter what. After leaving Suite 12, Michael continued his regular duties, his mind racing. The hospital corridors felt different somehow, as if the boundaries between his world and Alexandra's had suddenly blurred. He'd stepped through a doorway he hadn't known existed, and now he wasn't sure which side he belonged on. By the time his shift ended, dawn was breaking over Boston. The city was coming alive, the early commuters beginning to fill the streets, coffee shops raising their shutters. Michael caught the bus home, sitting by the window, watching the neighborhoods change as they traveled from the affluent hospital district to his working-class corner of Dorchester. The contrast had never seemed so stark. Alexandra Harrington lived in a penthouse in Back Bay. She traveled in private cars. She wore clothes that cost more than his monthly rent. Her world was boardrooms and charity galas and feature articles in financial magazines. His was discount grocery stores and secondhand clothing for Emma, and careful calculations to make sure the electricity bill got paid on time. Could those worlds really intersect? Or was this just a temporary alignment, two strangers meeting briefly before continuing on their separate paths? Elena was up when he arrived home, making breakfast for Emma. Michael looked at his daughter, her face scrunched in concentration as she arranged cereal pieces into patterns on her plate. Everything he did was for her. Every floor he mopped, every trash can he emptied, every indignity he endured. Would Alexandra's offer mean a better life for Emma? Or would it just be exchanging one form of uncertainty for another? "Daddy, you're staring," Emma observed, looking up from her cereal art. "Do I have something on my face?" "No, Peanut," Michael smiled, coming to sit beside her. "I was just thinking how lucky I am to have you." Emma nodded seriously. "Very lucky. I'm the best kid." "The absolute best," he agreed, dropping a kiss on top of her curls. Elena placed a cup of coffee in front of him, her eyes questioning. Michael gave a small nod, indicating they would talk later when Emma wasn't listening. His mother had an uncanny ability to read him, to sense when something important had happened. After breakfast, Elena took Emma to preschool, giving Michael a chance to shower and think. The hot water eased the physical tension in his muscles, but did nothing for the mental whirlwind. By the time he heard Elena return, he'd made his decision. She found him at the kitchen table, still damp from the shower, staring into a fresh cup of coffee. "Something happened," she said, taking the seat across from him. "Something with the woman you helped." Michael told her everything: Alexandra's improvement, the offer to work as a consultant, the possibility of being part of legitimate medical research. Elena listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded on the table, her eyes steady on his face. "What are you afraid of?" she asked when he finished. The question caught him off guard. He'd expected practical concerns about childcare, about job security, about the reliability of Alexandra's promises. Instead, his mother had gone straight to the heart of his hesitation. "I'm afraid of hoping again," he admitted. "I'm afraid of stepping back into that world and finding out I don't belong there anymore. I'm afraid of failing." Elena reached across the table and took his hand. "When your father came to this country," she said quietly, "he was a respected engineer in Romania. Here, he changed oil in cars and fixed brakes because his degree meant nothing. Every day, people spoke to him like he was stupid because his English wasn't perfect." She squeezed his fingers. "Did that make him less of an engineer?" Michael shook his head. "You are still a healer, Michael. Whether they give you a white coat or a mop, that hasn't changed. This woman, she sees that in you. She's offering you a chance to remember it too. But what if the remedy doesn't work long term? What if there are complications? Then you face them honestly," Elena said simply. "You use the knowledge you have. You learn what you need to learn. You do your best. That's all anyone can do." His mother made it sound so straightforward. And maybe it was. Maybe he was the one complicating things with his fears, his doubts, his sense of inadequacy. "What about Emma?" he asked. "If I take this position, my hours will change. I won't be able to spend as much time with her during the day." Elena smiled. "Emma and I will manage. She is strong, like her father. Like her grandmother," she added with a touch of pride. "Besides, isn't this the example you want to set for her? That it's never too late to pursue what matters?" He knew she was right. What would he tell Emma when she was older? That he'd turned down a chance to return to medicine because he was scared? That he'd chosen the safety of the familiar over the risk of reaching for something more? I'll call Alexandra, he decided. I'll tell her yes. Elena nodded, satisfied. Then you should sleep. You'll need your strength. As Michael lay in bed, the events of the past 24 hours played through his mind like scenes from someone else's life. Yesterday, he'd been a night shift janitor, invisible to most of the hospital staff. Today, he was being offered a position as a medical consultant to one of the most powerful pharmaceutical executives in the country. It didn't seem real. And yet, the evidence was undeniable. Alexandra's skin had improved dramatically after using the remedy. Victoria had documented the changes. Whatever was happening, it wasn't imagination or wishful thinking. He thought about Martha Wilson and her yellowed recipe card. She'd given it to him without hesitation when Emma was suffering, a stranger's kindness that had changed his daughter's life. Now he had the chance to extend that kindness to countless others, to transform Martha's traditional knowledge into something the modern medical establishment might accept. The responsibility was enormous. But for the first time in 5 years, Michael felt a sense of purpose that went beyond survival. He was standing at a crossroads, and instead of seeing only loss behind him, he could glimpse possibility ahead. And as sleep finally claimed him, Michael's last thought was of Sarah. She'd believed in his potential as a doctor. She'd supported his dream even when it meant financial sacrifice, even when it meant long hours apart while he studied. What would she think of this unexpected turn? He liked to believe she'd be proud, not just of the opportunity, but of his courage in considering it. When Michael woke that afternoon, his determination had solidified. He called Martha, asking if he could visit her apartment after dinner. Then he spent the evening with Emma, more present than he'd been in weeks, fully engaged in her stories about preschool, her questions about butterflies, her elaborate pretend games. At 7:30, he kissed her goodnight and walked down the hall to Martha's apartment. The elderly woman welcomed him warmly, ushering him into her small living room with its faded furniture and walls covered in black and white photographs of family members long gone. The scent of herbal tea and something baking filled the air. "Martha, I need to ask you something important," Michael began, sitting on the ancient sofa. "Do you remember the remedy you gave me for Emma's skin? The one from your grandmother?" Martha nodded, her face crinkling into a smile. "It worked, yes? The little one's skin is beautiful now." "It worked perfectly," Michael confirmed. "And now," he hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation with Alexandra. "I've used it to help someone else, a woman with a very serious skin condition. It's helping her too." Martha looked pleased but not surprised. "My grandmother helped many people with this remedy. In our village, people came from miles away when the doctors could not help them." Michael leaned forward. "Martha, the woman I'm helping, she's important. She runs a big pharmaceutical company. She wants to understand how the remedy works, why it helps when modern medicine doesn't." Martha's expression grew wary. These big companies, they want to take old wisdom and put it in pills, make much money, forget where it came from. "That's what I'm worried about too," Michael admitted. "But this woman, Alexandra, she's different. She wants to document everything properly. She wants to acknowledge the source, and she's offered me a position to help with the research." Martha studied him, her faded blue eyes sharp with intelligence. "For 5 years I have watched you, Michael, working so hard for your little girl, giving up your dreams of being a doctor." Her gnarled hand reached out to pat his knee. "You are a good man. This is a good chance for you. Would you be willing to talk to Alexandra?" Michael asked. "To explain the remedy in your own words? I think it's important that your knowledge is recognized, not just taken." Martha considered this, then nodded slowly. "I will talk to her, for you and for Emma. But," she added with sudden fierceness, "you must make them understand. This is not just ingredients in a jar. This is 5 generations of women watching and learning, adjusting, understanding the body in ways their machines cannot measure." "I promise," Michael said solemnly. "Your knowledge will be respected." Martha seemed satisfied with this. She rose from her chair with the careful movements of age and went to a small cabinet in the corner. From it, She withdrew a worn, leather-bound book, its pages yellow with time, the writing faded but still legible. My grandmother's book, she explained, placing it gently in Michael's hands. All her remedies, all her knowledge. I have kept it safe. Now you will use it to help people. The responsibility of the gesture wasn't lost on Michael. This wasn't just a collection of recipes. It was Martha's heritage, her family's legacy, and she was entrusting it to him. The weight of it felt sacred somehow. Martha, I don't know what to say. Say nothing, she waved dismissively. Just use it well. When Michael left Martha's apartment, the leather book carefully wrapped and placed in his backpack, he felt as though he was carrying something precious and powerful. A bridge between worlds that had been separated for too long. That night, he called the number Victoria had given him. Alexandra answered on the second ring, her voice stronger than it had been in the hospital. Michael, have you made your decision? Yes, he said, feeling a strange calm settle over him. I'll help with the research. And Martha's willing to speak with you too. Excellent, Alexandra sounded genuinely pleased. I've already spoken with the hospital administration. You'll be officially seconded to Harrington Biotech starting tomorrow. Victoria will handle all the paperwork. There's one condition, Michael said, surprising himself with his boldness. Martha's knowledge needs to be respected. This isn't just a formula to be patented and commercialized. It's traditional wisdom that's been refined over generations. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I understand, Alexandra said finally, and I agree. If we develop this into a commercial treatment, Martha will be properly credited and compensated. But more importantly, we'll document the full context of the remedy, the traditional knowledge it represents, the generations of observation and adjustment that went into perfecting it. Michael hadn't expected such ready agreement. Thank you, he said, relief evident in his voice. No, Michael, Alexandra corrected gently. Thank you. You had no reason to help me. No reason to risk your your reputation, your livelihood. But you did it anyway because you saw someone suffering. That kind of compassion is rare in my world. It's humbling. The sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. For years, he'd thought of people like Alexandra Harrington as existing in a different universe, untouchable, unreachable, playing by different rules. But in this moment, she was just a woman expressing genuine gratitude. The realization was strangely equalizing. I'll see you tomorrow then? Alexandra asked. Tomorrow, Michael confirmed. I'll bring more of the remedy, and we can start documenting Martha's knowledge properly. As he ended the call, Michael looked around his small apartment, at the worn furniture, the patched walls, the faded carpet. For 5 years, this had been the extent of his world, the boundary of what he believed possible. Now those boundaries were expanding in ways he couldn't have imagined 24 hours ago. He thought about Emma, asleep in her room with its secondhand furniture and carefully mended curtains. What might this mean for her future? Not just financially, but in terms of possibilities, of seeing her father reach for something beyond survival? Tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't predict. There would be skeptical doctors, corporate interests, scientific hurdles. The path ahead wasn't clear or certain. But for the first time since Sarah died, Michael felt like he was moving forward rather than simply holding ground. And that, perhaps, was the most unexpected remedy of all. The first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the hospital window, casting a warm glow across Alexandra's face as she examined her arm. The redness had faded considerably, the angry welts smoothing into patches of pink that no longer burned when touched. She ran her fingers gently over the area where she'd applied Michael's remedy, marveling at the texture, supple and healing where yesterday there had been only raw pain. Something was happening that defied every medical prediction, every specialist's grim prognosis. For the first time in weeks, Alexandra felt the stirring of real hope. Victoria entered carrying a tray with Alexandra's morning medication and a protein shake, the only breakfast she could manage with her compromised digestive system. The assistant's eyes immediately went to the treated areas of Alexandra's skin, widening slightly at the visible improvement overnight. Will he be coming back today? Within the hour. Victoria set down the tray, her efficiency masking her lingering skepticism. The hospital administrator called 3 times already. Apparently, reassigning a janitor to your personal staff without going through proper channels has created quite the administrative headache. Let them have their headache. Alexandra's voice was stronger than it had been in days, her CEO authority returning with each hour of diminished pain. I've donated $14 million to this hospital. They can handle a little paperwork disruption. Victoria's phone chimed with an incoming message. Dr. Patel and the immunology team are 5 minutes out. They're bringing the test results from yesterday's biopsies. What do you want me to tell them about? She gestured vaguely toward Alexandra's improved skin. The truth. Alexandra squared her shoulders, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at still healing tissue. That I'm trying an alternative treatment with promising initial results. If they want details, we'll provide them. I have nothing to hide, Victoria hesitated. And if they want to stop it, then they can discharge me. Alexandra's jaw set in the stubborn line familiar to anyone who had ever challenged her in a boardroom. I'm a private patient paying extraordinary sums for care that has thus far failed to produce results. I'm well within my rights to pursue alternative options. The sound of voices in the hallway announced the approaching medical team. Victoria straightened Alexandra's bedding, adjusted the blinds, and positioned herself beside the bed, the loyal gatekeeper she had been for over a decade. Dr. Patel entered first, followed by 3 specialists and 2 residents. The chief immunologist was in his 60s, with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone rarely questioned. His eyes went immediately to Alexandra's arms, his practiced clinical gaze assessing the changes. These areas show marked improvement. His tone was carefully neutral, but the surprise was evident. When did this development occur? Alexandra met his gaze directly. Within the past 24 hours, I've been using an alternative treatment, a topical compound with anti-inflammatory and skin regenerative properties. Dr. Patel's eyebrows rose fractionally. An alternative treatment? Provided by whom? The question hung in the air, pregnant with professional judgment. Alexandra could almost hear the thoughts forming behind Dr. Patel's careful expression. Quackery, desperation, the folly of even brilliant people when faced with their own mortality. A specialist in traditional medicine with expertise in dermatological conditions, Alexandra replied smoothly. The formula uses naturally derived compounds that appear particularly effective for my specific presentation of Stevens-Johnson. I see. Dr. Patel's tone suggested he saw quite a lot more than Alexandra was saying. And this specialist, they have credentials, publications, a history of successful treatments. Alexandra smiled thinly. They have results, doctor. Something no one in this room has managed to provide in 6 weeks of treatment. The youngest resident flinched visibly. One of the specialists coughed uncomfortably. Dr. Patel's expression remained carefully neutral, but his posture stiffened. Ms. Harrington, I understand your frustration. Your case has been particularly challenging, but untested remedies carry significant risks. Risks? Alexandra's laugh held no humor. I've lost 30 pounds. My kidneys nearly shut down from your steroids. My liver enzymes are through the roof from your immunosuppressants. I seized for 4 minutes after your last biological therapy. Her voice rose slightly, the accumulated fear and pain of weeks breaking through her usual control. What exactly would you say I have to lose at this point? The silence that followed was broken only by the soft beeping of monitors. Dr. Patel glanced at his team, then back at Alexandra. May I examine the treated areas? Alexandra nodded, extending her arm. The doctor's touch was gentle as he assessed the healing tissue, his clinical detachment giving way to genuine interest. The inflammation reduction is remarkable. The epidermal barrier appears to be regenerating. He straightened, professionalism reasserting itself. I would like to take samples from both treated and untreated areas for comparison. And I'd like full disclosure of the compound's ingredients for safety evaluation. You'll have both. Alexandra's tone made it clear this was a concession, not a capitulation. But the treatment continues regardless of your findings. Dr. Patel considered her for a long moment. As your physician of record, I cannot officially endorse an unverified treatment. But he hesitated, a man of science wrestling with the evidence before his eyes. As long as our ongoing tests show no organ damage or adverse systemic effects, I won't actively oppose it either. It was as close to approval as Alexandra was likely to get from the conservative physician. She nodded, accepting the qualified truce. The immunology team proceeded with their examination, drawing blood, photographing skin changes, collecting samples from treated areas. The atmosphere had shifted subtly, the resignation of previous visits replaced by a cautious, bewildered hope. After they departed, Victoria exhaled audibly. That went better than expected. They're scientists at heart, Alexandra mused. Confronted with results they can't explain, curiosity eventually outweighs skepticism. The good ones, anyway. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. Victoria opened it to find Michael standing there, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes instead of his janitor's uniform. He carried a leather satchel and a fresh jar of the remedy. The hospital corridors felt different without his cart and mop, as if he were trespassing in a space where he'd previously been invisible. Victoria ushered him in quickly, glancing up and down the hallway before closing the door. The medical team just left. Patel saw the improvement. Michael set his satchel on the visitor's chair. What did he say? Alexandra smiled. He's cautiously intrigued, wants samples and ingredient lists, but he's not standing in our way. Michael pulled out the jar, larger than the first one he'd brought. I made a fresh batch last night. Martha gave me her recipe book, generations of her family's remedies, all handwritten. He placed the leather-bound volume on the bedside table with reverence. She's willing to meet with you whenever you're ready. Victoria examined the book with newfound respect, gingerly turning the fragile pages covered in faded Cyrillic script interspersed with botanical drawings. These aren't just recipes, they're case histories, observations of symptoms, adjustments to formulations, follow-up notes. Martha's grandmother was conducting clinical trials in her own way. Alexandra leaned forward, interested. Bring it closer. Let me see. Michael watched as Alexandra studied the pages, her scientific mind engaging with this unorthodox documentation. Her finger traced the careful notations, the pressed plant specimens, the meticulous drawings of skin conditions before and after treatment. This is extraordinary. Each case is documented systematically with control measures, dosage adjustments, long-term follow-up. It's not double-blind or peer-reviewed, Michael acknowledged, but the methodical approach was there long before modern clinical trials existed. Alexandra looked up at him, a new respect in her eyes. Your neighbor understood something fundamental about medicine, that healing isn't just science, it's also art in history and close observation. Somewhere along the way, we've forgotten that. The moment held between them, a shared understanding that bridged their different worlds. Then Victoria cleared her throat, bringing them back to practicalities. I've arranged for lab space at Harrington Biotech. Once Alexandra is discharged, we can begin formal research there. In the meantime, I've set up a temporary workspace in the hospital's research wing. Michael's stomach tightened with anxiety. A lab, equipment he hadn't touched since dropping out of medical school. Scientists who would see him as an interloper, an unqualified janitor playing at being a researcher. Would they listen to him? Would they respect Martha's knowledge? Alexandra seemed to read his thoughts. You'll have my full authority behind you, Michael. Anyone who dismisses you will answer directly to me. The assurance helped, but didn't completely quell his unease. When do we start? Now. Alexandra pushed the call button for the nurse. I'm going to accelerate my discharge. There's no reason for me to stay here if the remedy continues to work. I can recover at home while we begin the research process. Michael shook his head in amazement. Yesterday, you could barely sit up. Alexandra's eyes glinted with the determination that had built her company from nothing. Yesterday, I thought I was dying. Today, I have work to do. 3 days later, Michael stood in Alexandra's private home office, struggling to process the opulence around him. Her penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of a historic building in Back Bay, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. The office alone was larger than his entire apartment, furnished with antiques and modern art pieces that probably cost more than he'd earn in a lifetime of janitorial work. The contrast with his life in Dorchester was jarring. This morning, he'd helped Emma get dressed for preschool in their small bathroom, with its perpetually dripping faucet. He'd kissed his mother goodbye in their kitchen, where the linoleum was peeling at the corners. Then he'd taken 2 buses and a subway to arrive in this other world, a world of privilege so complete it was invisible to those who inhabited it. Alexandra sat at her desk reviewing the preliminary lab reports on the remedy. Although still weak, she had improved dramatically in the 3 days since beginning treatment. The angry red welts had faded to pink, the scaling had diminished significantly, and she could move without constant pain. She was dressed simply but expensively in a silk blouse and tailored pants, her short dark hair newly styled, her face showing hints of the beauty that had graced magazine covers before her illness. The chemical analysis is fascinating, she mused, looking up at Michael. The calendula extract contains a unique flavonoid profile that differs from commercially available extracts, likely due to the alkaline soil conditions, as Martha suggested. And the raw honey has an unusual enzymatic activity, again, probably related to the specific wildflowers the bees fed on. Michael nodded, still distracted by his surroundings. I've been researching similar traditional remedies from Eastern Europe. There are parallels in Romanian, Hungarian, and Russian folk medicine, but none with the specific preparation methods Martha described. The combination seems to create a synergistic effect that's greater than the sum of its parts. Alexandra tapped her pen against the lab report thoughtfully. The challenge will be standardizing production while maintaining the efficacy. Would standardization even be possible, Michael wondered? Martha had emphasized the importance of harvesting plants at specific times, of preparing the remedy during certain lunar phases. How much of that was superstition and how much was observational wisdom that science hadn't yet explained? Victoria entered with a tray of tea and a folder of documents. She had gradually shifted from overt hostility toward Michael to a cautious, professional respect, though her protective instincts toward Alexandra remained vigilant. The legal team has prepared the consulting contract. She set the folder in front of Michael. Full medical researcher, compensation, health benefits for you and your daughter, and provisions for Martha Wilson's involvement as a knowledge consultant. Michael opened the folder, and the figures on the first page made his breath catch. The annual salary was 4 times what he made as a janitor. The benefits package included premium health insurance that would cover all of Emma's needs, a retirement plan, even tuition assistance. It was everything he'd lost when he'd been forced to drop out of medical school. Security, respectability, the chance to use his mind instead of just his body. This is very generous. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. It's fair compensation for expertise, Alexandra corrected. You've brought something valuable to the table, Michael. Value deserves recognition. He signed the contract with a hand that trembled slightly, aware that he was crossing a threshold. No longer a janitor, no longer invisible, but not quite a doctor either, something in between, occupying a space he hadn't known existed. Martha arrives at 2, Victoria reminded them, collecting the signed documents. The research team will be here at 3 to begin protocol development. Michael nodded, anxiety mingling with anticipation. He'd spoken with Martha last night, preparing her for today's meeting. She'd been surprisingly sanguine about the whole affair, viewing Alexandra's interest as validation of what she had always known, that her family's remedies contained genuine healing power that transcended cultural divides. As Victoria left, Alexandra rose from her desk with careful movements, still mindful of her healing skin. Come with me. I want to show you something. Michael followed her through the penthouse to a large room he hadn't seen before. It looked like a shrine to scientific achievement. Framed patents on the walls, glass cases displaying early prototypes of Harrington biotech products, photographs of Alexandra with various dignitaries and research teams. At the center stood a large portrait of a young woman with Alexandra's eyes in a gentler smile. My sister, Melissa. Alexandra's voice softened. She died at 17 from complications of Sjögren's syndrome, an autoimmune disorder that primarily affects the moisture-producing glands. Uncommon but not rare enough to qualify as an orphan disease, which meant pharmaceutical companies saw little profit potential in developing treatments. Michael studied the portrait, a girl frozen in time, her potential unrealized. Is that why you started your company? Alexandra nodded, her gaze fixed on her sister's face. I promised her I would change the system, that I would create treatments for conditions the big companies ignored because the market was too small or the profits too uncertain. It was a different side of Alexandra Harrington than the ruthless CEO portrayed in the business press, a woman driven by personal loss rather than pure ambition. Michael thought of Sarah, of his own life derailed by grief, and felt an unexpected kinship with Alexandra. We both lost someone we couldn't save. Alexandra turned to him, seeing him properly for perhaps the first time. And we both found ways to keep our promises to them, didn't we? You by being the father Sarah would have wanted for Emma. Me by building a company that develops treatments Melissa never had access to. It was a moment of perfect understanding. Two people from vastly different worlds connected by the shared experience of loving and losing. The distance between CEO and janitor seemed suddenly insignificant compared to what they had in common. The moment was broken by Victoria's discreet knock. Martha Wilson has arrived. Martha entered the room with the unhurried dignity of age, leaning lightly on a cane, her white hair neatly pinned back. She wore what was clearly her best outfit, a navy blue dress that had been fashionable decades ago, sensible shoes polished to a high shine, a cameo brooch at her collar. Despite the grandeur surrounding her, she showed no sign of intimidation. Her sharp blue eyes took in Alexandra's appearance, clinically assessing the healing skin. Better. Much better. The remedy is working well for you. Alexandra extended her hand with genuine respect. Mrs. Wilson, thank you for coming, and thank you for sharing your knowledge with Michael. I believe you've saved my life. Martha accepted the handshake with a firm grip belying her age. My grandmother always said knowledge that stays locked away helps no one. The remedy was meant for healing, not for keeping secret. Victoria guided them to a comfortable seating area where she had arranged refreshments. As they settled in, Alexandra explained their hope of documenting Martha's knowledge and potentially developing standardized versions of her remedies for wider use. Martha listened carefully, her weathered hands resting on the leather recipe book in her lap. This is not just mixing things in a bowl, you understand. It is knowing when to harvest. The calendula must be picked at midday when the dew has dried but before the afternoon heat. The lavender only at full moon when the essential oils are strongest. She tapped the book for emphasis. 5 generations of women in my family learned these things by watching, by doing, by passing down wisdom mother to daughter. Alexandra nodded, taking notes. Would you be willing to teach our research team these methods? To show them what cannot be written down? Martha considered this, her gaze moving from Alexandra to Michael and back. You are not like other rich people I have known. You listen. You respect old knowledge. She nodded once decisively. I will teach, but you must promise. The remedies will be available to all who need them, not just those who can pay many dollars. Alexandra didn't hesitate. You have my word. If we succeed in developing standardized versions, they will be accessible and affordable. It was a promise that would likely raise eyebrows in the boardroom, but Michael sensed Alexandra meant every word. The experience of her own illness, of being at the mercy of a condition no amount of money could cure, seemed to have shifted something fundamental in her approach. For the next 2 hours, Martha walked them through the history of her family's remedies, explaining the cultural context, the observational wisdom, the adjustments made generation by generation. Victoria recorded everything, while Alexandra asked incisive questions that revealed her scientific background without dismissing the traditional knowledge. Michael watched this unlikely collaboration with growing amazement. The elderly Polish immigrant with a 5th-grade education, the billionaire CEO with advanced degrees, the former medical student turned janitor. On paper, they had nothing in common. In practice, they were building a bridge between worlds that had been separated for too long. Traditional wisdom and modern science, privilege and pragmatism, academia and lived experience. When the research team arrived, 5 scientists in business casual attire, clearly unsure what to expect, Martha commanded their attention with the quiet authority of someone who knows her worth beyond credentials. She answered their skeptical questions with practical demonstrations, showing how the consistency of the remedy changed with different preparation methods, explaining how variations in ingredient quality affected efficacy. By the end of the session, even the most dubious researcher was taking detailed notes. Alexandra concluded the meeting with clear directives. Develop protocols for standardizing the remedy while preserving its efficacy, design preliminary testing procedures, and prepare for potential clinical trials, all while continuing to consult with both Martha and Michael at every stage. As the team filed out, buzzing with ideas and assignments, Michael felt a strange mixture of pride and disbelief. 24 hours ago, these scientists would have passed him in the hospital corridor without a glance. Now they were asking for his input, treating him as a colleague. The transition was dizzying. After Martha departed, escorted home by Victoria, Michael and Alexandra remained in her office, reviewing notes from the meeting. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting the room in golden light. Despite the productive session, Michael couldn't shake a lingering sense of unreality, of being a visitor in a world where he didn't truly belong. Alexandra noticed his distraction. "What's on your mind, Michael?" He hesitated, then decided on honesty. "All of this, the penthouse, the research team, the consulting contract, it doesn't feel real. Yesterday, I was mopping floors and emptying trash cans. Today, I'm helping design clinical trials. I keep waiting for someone to realize I don't belong here." Alexandra set down her notes, studying him thoughtfully. "Do you know what imposter syndrome is?" Michael nodded. "The feeling that you've somehow fooled everyone into thinking you're competent, when you're actually not. That you don't deserve your success. I've had it my entire career." Alexandra's admission surprised him. "Every time I raised venture capital, every time I presented at a medical conference, every time I sat in a boardroom full of men twice my age, there was always a voice in my head saying, they're going to figure out you're a fraud. But you built $1 billion company. You've developed treatments that save lives, and you were 3 years into Harvard Medical School before circumstances forced you to drop out." Alexandra's gaze was steady. "Your knowledge didn't disappear when you picked up a mop, Michael. Your worth as a thinker, as a healer, didn't diminish because your job title changed." Her words touched something deep in Michael, a wound that had never properly healed. For 5 years, he'd been treated as invisible, his intelligence and training irrelevant to his role as a janitor. He'd accepted it as the price of survival, of providing for Emma. But the cost to his sense of self had been steeper than he'd admitted. "You don't know what it's like," he said quietly, "to be treated as if you're nothing, to have doctors look through you like you're part of the furniture, to have nurses call you the cleaning guy instead of your name." Alexander was silent for a moment, acknowledging the truth in his words. "No, I don't know that experience. But I do know what it's like to have my knowledge dismissed because I'm a woman, to have investors talk to my male subordinates instead of me, to have doctors patronize me even as I lay dying in a hospital bed. It wasn't the same, and they both knew it. But there was enough common ground to build understanding." "The world sees what it expects to see," Alexander continued. "People look at uniforms, at titles, at trappings, and make assumptions. The challenge is not letting those assumptions define how you see yourself." Michael nodded slowly, absorbing her words. It was easy for someone in Alexandra's position to philosophize about self-worth transcending social perception. Her wealth and power insulated her from the daily indignities he faced. And yet, there was wisdom in what she said, a reminder that he had allowed his circumstances to diminish his view of himself in ways that went beyond his financial situation. Their conversation was interrupted by Michael's phone, a text from Elena letting him know she'd picked up Emma from preschool. He glanced at his watch, surprised by how late it had gotten. "I should go. My mother has been with Emma all day." Alexandra nodded. "We'll continue tomorrow. The research team wants to observe the preparation process from start to finish." As Michael gathered his things, Alexandra walked him to the elevator, a small courtesy that acknowledged their evolving relationship as colleagues rather than employer and employee. The elevator doors opened to reveal a distinguished older man in an expensive suit who looked startled to find Alexandra standing there. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Alexandra's voice held surprise and something else. Wariness, perhaps. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd check on my daughter." The man's gaze moved from Alexandra to Michael, taking in his ordinary clothes and worn backpack with barely concealed judgment. "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" The hesitation before friend spoke volumes. Michael felt himself being assessed and dismissed in the span of seconds, another reminder of the world he was attempting to navigate. "Just to James Harrington, my father." Alexandra's tone was carefully neutral. "Dad, this is Michael Reynolds, our new research consultant on a promising treatment for Stevens-Johnson syndrome." The older man extended his hand with practiced politeness that didn't reach his eyes. "A pleasure." His attention immediately returned to his daughter. "You're looking better." The treatments are working? A treatment is working. Yes. Alexandra's emphasis was subtle but clear. We're exploring a promising new approach based on traditional medicine. Traditional medicine? Der Harrington's skepticism was palpable. You mean herbal remedies and folk cures? Alexandra, surely you of all people understand the importance of rigorous scientific validation, which is exactly what we're pursuing. Alexandra's smile didn't waver, but Michael could see tension in her posture. Michael has brought us a treatment approach with demonstrated efficacy that we're now subjecting to proper scientific analysis. I see. Dr. Harrington's gaze returned to Michael, reassessing. And your background, Mr. Reynolds? Where did you study? The question hung in the air, weighted with assumptions about credentials and pedigree. Michael felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the sensation of being found wanting by someone who measured worth in degrees and affiliations. Harvard Medical School. Michael kept his voice steady, not mentioning that he never graduated. Before that, Boston University. Dr. Harrington nodded, seemingly satisfied by the prestigious names. Well, I won't keep you. He stepped out of the elevator, allowing Michael to enter. Alexandra, we should discuss the board's concerns about your extended absence from the company. Callaway has been making noise about interim leadership. We can discuss it later, Dad. Alexandra's tone made it clear the conversation was over. I have work to do. As the elevator doors closed, Michael caught a final glimpse of Dr. Harrington's disapproving expression and Alexandra's rigid posture. Another reminder of the complications that came with crossing into Alexandra's world. The scrutiny, the expectations, the politics that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with power. The next 2 weeks established a new routine for Michael. Mornings with Emma, handing her off to Elena for preschool, then days at Harrington Biotech's research facility working alongside scientists to document and standardize Martha's remedies. The work was exhilarating, a return to the intellectual engagement he'd missed desperately since dropping out of medical school. His knowledge of both traditional and modern approaches made him a valuable bridge between Martha's wisdom and the researcher's scientific methodology. Alexandra divided her time between recovering at home and overseeing the research project, her natural authority undiminished by her ongoing recuperation. Under her leadership, the team made rapid progress, identifying the active compounds in the remedy, developing protocols for standardized preparation, designing preliminary safety tests that wouldn't require animal trials. Michael found himself looking forward to their collaboration sessions, when Alexandra would join them in the lab to review findings and direct next steps. She had a brilliant scientific mind beneath her business acumen, asking insightful questions, suggesting innovative approaches, connecting disparate pieces of information into coherent theories. Working with her was unlike anything Michael had experienced. Challenging, stimulating, occasionally intimidating, but never dull. Their professional relationship gradually developed a personal dimension through late-night phone calls to discuss research developments, shared meals in the lab when work ran long, conversations that drifted from medicine to philosophy, from science to life experiences. Michael learned about Alexandra's childhood as the brilliant daughter of a demanding academic father, her rebellion in dropping out of her PhD program to start Harrington Biotech, her single-minded focus on her company at the expense of personal relationships. Alexandra, in turn, heard about Michael's working-class upbringing, his determination to become the first in his family to attend medical school, his deep love for Sarah, and the devastating impact of her loss. She asked about Emma with genuine interest, not the polite inquiries of someone making conversation, but the curiosity of someone who wanted to understand what mattered to him. They were building something between them. Not quite friendship, not quite professional collaboration, but a connection that transcended both. Neither acknowledged it directly, both aware of the complications it presented. The CEO and the former janitor, inhabiting worlds that rarely intersected in meaningful ways. The bubble of their shared purpose was pierced 3 weeks into the project when Dr. James Harrington arrived unannounced at the lab, accompanied by 3 members of Harrington Biotech's board of directors. Alexandra was demonstrating the preparation technique Martha had taught her, sleeves rolled up, hands coated in the golden remedy, when the delegation appeared in the doorway. What is the meaning of this? Der Harrington's voice cut through the focused quiet of the lab. Alexandra, the board has been trying to reach you for days. We have major decisions pending that require your input, and instead we find you playing with herbal concoctions? The laboratory staff froze, uncomfortable witnesses to what was clearly an executive-level confrontation. Alexandra straightened slowly, wiping her hands on a towel, her expression shifting from scientist to CEO in the space of seconds. If the board needed me, they could have scheduled a meeting through Victoria, who manages my calendar. She nodded to the researchers. Please continue with the protocol development. I'll speak with my father and the directors privately. She led the group to a conference room, her posture betraying no hint of the weakness that still occasionally plagued her recovering body. Michael remained in the lab, but the tension left in Alexandra's wake made concentration impossible. The researchers exchanged uneasy glances, all too aware of the corporate politics at play. 20 minutes later, Alexandra returned alone, her expression tightly controlled. To her credit, she resumed her position at the lab bench as if the interruption had never occurred, picking up exactly where she'd left off in the demonstration. But Michael could see the tension in her shoulders, the slight tremor in her usually steady hands. When the researchers broke for lunch, Michael stayed behind, organizing notes from the morning session. Alexandra remained as well, staring at data printouts without really seeing them. Are you okay? Michael asked finally. Alexandra looked up, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal the strain beneath. The board is concerned about the direction of this project. They think I'm wasting company resources on an unproven folk remedy because my illness has affected my judgment. She laughed without humor. Apparently nearly dying has made me emotionally compromised. What did you tell them? That preliminary tests show promise, that standardized production is achievable, that if successful, this could represent an entirely new treatment approach for a range of conditions with significant market potential. Alexandra's voice was bitter. I had to frame it in terms of profit margins and market share to get them to listen. None of them cared that it saved my life. None of them saw the human potential, only the bottom line. The weight of corporate expectations seemed to press down on her physically, the burden of leading a company where science was ultimately in service to shareholders rather than patients. Michael realized how naive he'd been, seeing only the privilege of Alexandra's position without fully understanding its constraints. She might be CEO, but she answered to a board focused on financial returns, to investors watching quarterly profits, to market analysts tracking stock performance. What if they're right? Alexandra's question was so quiet, Michael almost missed it. What if I am letting personal experience cloud my professional judgment? What if all of this is just wishful thinking? The doubt in her voice struck Michael deeply. In the weeks he'd known her, Alexandra had never shown uncertainty, not about her company, not about the research, not about her own authority. To hear it now revealed a vulnerability she kept carefully hidden from the world. Is that what you believe? He asked gently. Alexandra was silent for a long moment. No, her voice strengthened with conviction. No, I believe we're on to something important, something that bridges traditional wisdom and modern science in ways that could help thousands of patients. The board sees only risk and uncertainty. I see possibility. Then that's what matters. Michael's faith in her was absolute. The research will either validate our approach or it won't. Science doesn't care about boardroom politics. Alexandra smiled slightly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Thank you for the reminder and for seeing me as more than just the CEO. The moment held between them, a connection that went beyond their professional relationship, beyond the hierarchical distance between their positions. For a brief instant, they were simply two people united by a common purpose, seeing each other clearly despite the social constructs that should have kept them apart. The moment was broken by Michael's phone alerting him to a text from Elena. Emma's preschool had called. She had a fever and needed to be picked up. He showed Alexandra the message, already gathering his things. I'm sorry, I have to go. Of course, Alexandra nodded. Family comes first. Take whatever time you need. Michael hurried to the preschool, finding Emma flushed and miserable in the nurse's office, her temperature hovering around 101. He carried her to the bus stop, her small arms wrapped around his neck, her hot cheek pressed against his shoulder. The bus ride home felt interminable, Emma growing heavier in his arms, whimpering occasionally when the bus hit a pothole. Elena was waiting with children's fever reducer and a cool cloth. Together, they settled Emma on the couch with her favorite stuffed rabbit and a cup of watered-down juice. Michael sat beside her, stroking her curls back from her forehead, his heart aching at her discomfort. How quickly priorities shifted. The exciting research developments of the morning now seemed distant and unimportant compared to his daughter's needs. He texted Victoria to let her know he wouldn't be back that afternoon, then focused entirely on Emma. Elena prepared chicken soup, Michael read Emma's favorite stories, and gradually the fever reducer took effect, bringing some color back to her cheeks. By early evening, she was sleeping peacefully, the fever down to a manageable 99 degrees. Michael was in the kitchen, helping Elena clean up, when a knock came at the apartment door. He opened it to find Alexandra standing in the hallway, looking oddly uncertain. Her designer clothes and perfect grooming seemed wildly out of place in the worn apartment building, with its flickering hallway lights and scuffed floors. "I hope I'm not intruding." She held up a paper bag from a local pharmacy. "I brought some children's electrolyte drinks and fever patches." Victoria mentioned Emma wasn't feeling well. Michael was momentarily speechless, struck by the incongruity of Alexandra Harrington standing in his doorway, bearing practical remedies for a sick child. It was the last thing he would have expected from the formidable CEO. This simple act of human kindness that had nothing to do with business or research or professional obligation. "Please come in." He stepped aside, suddenly self-conscious about the small apartment with its second-hand furniture and patched walls. "It's not much, but it's home." Alexandra entered, taking in the worn but clean space with interest rather than judgment. "Something delicious smells good." Elena appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes widening at the sight of the elegant visitor. Michael made hasty introductions, watching his mother's quick assessment of Alexandra, a woman's intuitive evaluation of another woman's character and intentions. "Emma is sleeping now." Elena's English was accented but clear. "The fever is better. Would you like some soup?" "I made plenty," Alexandra accepted with genuine gratitude, and soon the three adults were seated at the small kitchen table, steam rising from bowls of chicken soup with homemade noodles. The scene was surreal to Michael. Alexandra Harrington in her silk blouse and tailored pants, eating his mother's soup in their Dorchester apartment, discussing traditional remedies for childhood fevers as if they were old friends. Elena shared her own family recipes for treating common ailments. Alexandra listened with genuine interest, and Michael watched the unexpected connection forming between these women from vastly different worlds. There was something powerful in the moment, a reminder that beneath the trappings of wealth and status, beyond the limitations of education and opportunity, human experiences created common ground that transcended social divisions. After dinner, Alexandra insisted on helping with the dishes despite Elena's protests. As they worked side by side at the sink, Michael checked on Emma, finding her awake and cooler to the touch. "Feeling better, Peanut?" Emma nodded sleepily, then her eyes widened as she spotted Alexandra in the kitchen doorway. "Who's that lady?" "A friend from work." Alexandra approached carefully, not wanting to intrude. "I heard you weren't feeling well, so I brought you some special drinks that might help you feel better." Emma studied Alexandra with the frank curiosity of childhood. "Are you a doctor?" "No, not a doctor," Alexandra smiled. "I run a company that makes medicine to help people get better, like the medicine that helped my skin." Emma pushed up her sleeve, showing a small patch of healed eczema, the last visible reminder of her previous condition. Alexandra glanced at Michael, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Yes, exactly like that. Medicines that help when other treatments don't work." Emma nodded, accepting this explanation. "My daddy used to be almost a doctor. He still has his white coat in the closet." Michael felt heat rise in his cheeks at this innocent revelation of his preserved hopes. Emma had found the coat once while playing hide-and-seek, and he'd had to explain why he kept it, a tangible reminder of the path he'd been forced to abandon. Alexandra's expression softened. "Your daddy is very smart. He's helping us make new medicines at my company." Emma considered this seriously. Is that why he doesn't clean floors anymore? The question hung in the air, laden with implications a 4-year-old couldn't possibly understand, about status and opportunity, about the value society placed on different forms of work, about the paths life opened and closed seemingly at random. "That's right," Alexandra answered carefully. Your daddy has special knowledge that's very valuable to us. We're lucky to have him on our team. Michael felt something catch in his throat at Alexandra's words. The simple validation of his worth as a thinker, as a contributor, as something more than the job title he'd carried for 5 years. In Emma's eyes, in Alexandra's, in that moment, he was not defined by what circumstances had forced him to become, but by who he truly was. After Emma drifted back to sleep, Alexandra prepared to leave, thanking Elena for the meal and promising to share the research team's findings on traditional remedies. At the door, she paused, turning to Michael with an uncharacteristic hesitation. Thank you for letting me intrude on your family time. It was illuminating. Thank you for coming, for the children's drinks, but more than that, for seeing Emma, for treating her like she matters. Michael struggled to articulate what her visit had meant. Not just the practical help, but the implicit acknowledgement that his family life was as important as their research project. Alexandra's gaze was direct, her voice soft but certain. She matters because she matters to you. And you matter to me, not just as a research partner, but as a person I've come to respect. And she hesitated as if uncertain of the territory they were entering and care about. The words hung between them, charged with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Michael found himself standing closer to her than professional courtesy would dictate, drawn by something that transcended their different worlds. For a breathless moment, he thought Alexandra might close the distance between them. Instead, she stepped back slightly, professional poise reasserting itself. I'll see you when Emma's better. Don't rush back. Family comes first. As Michael watched her walk down the hallway toward the elevator, he felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. A boundary crossed, a possibility acknowledged. A future neither had anticipated suddenly visible on the horizon. Whether that was cause for hope or concern remained to be seen. 3 months had passed since Alexandra's first encounter with Michael and his healing remedy. Spring had yielded to summer in Boston, bringing warmth to the city's brick buildings and green spaces. At Harrington Biotech, the research project had progressed from preliminary testing to formal clinical trials, with promising results that silenced even the most skeptical board members. Alexandra's own recovery had become the first documented case study, her skin now completely healed, leaving only the faintest traces of her near-fatal condition. The corporate machine had embraced what they'd initially dismissed, rebranding Martha's traditional remedy as Novaderm, a breakthrough therapy for severe dermatological conditions. Marketing materials featured sophisticated graphics of molecular structures alongside carefully curated language about synergistic botanical compounds and advanced phytotherapeutic protocols. The simplicity of honey and herbs had been transformed into something the pharmaceutical world could understand and value. Alexandra stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office, watching summer clouds drift over the Charles River. The company was thriving, the board was appeased, and her position as CEO was more secure than ever. By every objective measure, her life had returned to its pre-illness trajectory of success and achievement. Yet something fundamental had shifted inside her. Priorities rearranged, perspectives altered. Walls that had taken years to build, now showing hairline fractures. Victoria entered with the quarterly financial reports and a stack of meeting requests. The development team wants to discuss expanding Novaderm applications to pediatric cases, and the PR department needs approval for the press release about Martha Wilson's consultant position. Also, your father called, again, about the Harvard Medical School fundraising gala. Alexandra took the folders without looking at them. Has Michael confirmed for dinner tonight? Victoria's expression remained professionally neutral, though Alexandra didn't miss the hint of concern in her eyes. He has. Car service will pick him up at 7. Are you sure this is wise? Personal involvement with a staff member, especially given your respective positions in the company? The comment hung in the air, laden with implications about power dynamics, corporate politics, and the carefully constructed public image Alexandra had maintained throughout her career. The old Alexandra would have bristled at the implied criticism, would have shut down the conversation with a sharp reminder about professional boundaries. Instead, she found herself considering Victoria's concerns with genuine reflection. When I was dying in that hospital bed, no amount of money or power made any difference. What mattered was human connection. someone who saw me as a person, not a position. Michael reminded me of that. No matter what happens tonight, I'm grateful for the reminder. Victoria's professional veneer softened slightly. Just be careful. Both of you have a lot to lose if this goes wrong. Alexandra nodded, acknowledging the reality behind Victoria's warning. The world they navigated was unforgiving of missteps, particularly when they crossed the rigid boundaries of class and status. A CEO dating a former janitor would raise eyebrows in boardrooms and at charity galas alike, inviting speculation about judgment and propriety from people who measured worth in credentials and family names. Yet as Alexandra prepared for the evening, selecting a simple dress rather than her usual power suits, she found herself caring less about those judgments than she would have imagined possible. Near-death experiences had a way of clarifying priorities, of separating the essential from the merely important. And something about her connection with Michael felt essential in a way her career accomplishments, for all their significance, did not. Michael stood before the scratched mirror in his bathroom, adjusting a tie he rarely had occasion to wear. The invitation to dinner at Alexandra's penthouse had caught him off guard. Their relationship had remained strictly professional since her visit during Emma's illness, focused entirely on the research project and its promising results. They had carefully maintained appropriate boundaries, aware of the complications that anything more personal would introduce. Yet the undercurrent between them had persisted, evident in lingering glances, in conversations that stretched beyond research parameters, in the gradual erosion of the formality that had initially defined their interactions. The dinner invitation felt like a deliberate step across a threshold neither had been willing to acknowledge directly. Elena appeared in this doorway, Emma balanced on her hip. The 4-year-old reached out, tugging at Michael's tie with curious fingers. "You look fancy, Daddy." Michael smiled, tapping her nose gently. "Special dinner with Ms. Harrington tonight, Peanut. You be good for Grandma, okay?" Emma's expression turned serious. "Is Ms. Harrington your girlfriend now?" The innocent question jolted Michael with its perceptiveness. Children had an uncanny ability to cut through adult complexities to the essential truth. Was Alexandra his girlfriend? The notion seemed simultaneously absurd and thrilling. The powerful CEO and the former janitor, building something personal amid the clinical environment of pharmaceutical research. She's a good friend who wants to talk about some important things. Michael kept his answer deliberately vague, aware of Elena watching with knowing eyes. "I won't be late." Elena's smile held generations of maternal wisdom. "Don't rush home on our account. Some conversations deserve all the time they need." The car that arrived outside their apartment building drew curious glances from neighbors. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows, a uniformed driver who opened the door with practiced deference. Michael felt the weight of the disparity as he settled into the leather seat. The luxury of the vehicle a stark reminder of the world he was temporarily entering. The driver navigated Boston's evening traffic with professional precision, bringing Michael to Alexandra's building as sunset painted the city skyline in shades of amber and gold. A doorman greeted him by name, a small detail that suggested Alexandra had prepared for his arrival with characteristic thoroughness. The elevator ascended smoothly to the penthouse floor, opening directly into her foyer. Alexandra greeted him wearing a simple blue dress rather than her usual business attire, her short dark hair framing a face that had regained its healthy glow. Without the barriers of a conference room or laboratory setting, the moment felt charged with unacknowledged possibilities. "Thank you for coming." Her smile held genuine warmth rather than professional courtesy. "I thought we deserved a conversation that wasn't interrupted by lab techs or board members." The penthouse had transformed since Michael's last visit. Gone were the research materials and medical journals that had cluttered surfaces during her recovery. The space felt more personal now, fresh flowers on tables, music playing softly in the background, windows open to the summer evening. She had prepared dinner herself rather than hiring a chef, a detail Michael found unexpectedly touching. "I wanted something normal," Alexandra explained as she led him to a table set on the terrace overlooking the city. "The board dinner last night involved 5 courses and more silverware than I could keep track of. Tonight is just food and conversation. No corporate politics, no research protocols." The simple pasta dish she served belied her reputation as a driven CEO who subsisted on coffee and takeout. They ate as twilight settled over Boston, the city lights emerging like earthbound stars below them. Their conversation flowed easily, liberated from the constraints of their professional relationship, childhood memories, books that had shaped them, dreams deferred and discovered. With each exchange, the distance between their worlds seemed to narrow, revealing unexpected parallels in their journeys despite the vastly different circumstances. I've been thinking about what happens next. Alexandra's tone shifted slightly, addressing the unspoken question that had hovered between them. The remedy, Novaderm, is moving into formal production. Your consulting contract ends in 3 weeks. Michael had been anticipating this conversation, preparing himself for the inevitable conclusion of his temporary role in Alexandra's life and company. The past months had been an unexpected detour from his reality, but he had always known it would eventually end, returning him to the life he had built since Sarah's death. I've been looking at options. His voice remained steady despite the pang of regret. There are several hospitals with openings in environmental services management. Better pay than my previous position, more regular hours for Emma's sake. Alexandra set down her glass, meeting his gaze directly. That's not what I meant. We're establishing a new research division focused entirely on integrating traditional knowledge with modern pharmaceutical development. Martha's remedies are just the beginning. There's centuries of wisdom that has been dismissed because it didn't come through conventional medical channels. She hesitated, choosing her next words carefully. I want you to lead it, Michael. Not as a consultant, but as division director. Permanent position, full benefits, salary commensurate with your expertise and responsibility. The proposal struck Michael with physical force, momentarily robbing him of speech. It was more than a job offer. It was a complete redirection of his life path, an opportunity to reclaim the purpose he had abandoned when forced to leave medical school. It was also, he recognized, a significant professional risk for Alexandra, appointing a man without formal credentials to a director-level position at a prestigious pharmaceutical company. Why me? The question emerged from his deepest insecurity. You could hire someone with a PhD, with publications and credentials. Someone the board wouldn't question. Alexandra's response came without hesitation, her conviction absolute. Because you understand both worlds. You have the scientific background and the respect for traditional knowledge. You see people, not just patients or test subjects. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. And because I trust you, your judgment, your integrity, your vision, that's worth more than any degree or publication record. The weight of her faith in him was simultaneously uplifting and terrifying. For 5 years, Michael had carefully managed his expectations, accepting the limitations circumstances had imposed, focusing on survival rather than ambition. Alexander was offering something beyond his carefully circumscribed hopes, a return to meaningful work, financial security for Emma, a chance to transform his family's future. But beneath the professional opportunity lay something more personal, more fragile, more complicated. The growing connection between them couldn't be separated from the power dynamics of employer and employee, benefactor and recipient. If he accepted her offer, those complexities would only deepen, creating questions about his motivations, her judgment, the authenticity of whatever was developing between them. This isn't just about the choice. His question acknowledged the unspoken dimension of her offer, the personal implications that neither had fully articulated. Alexandra held his gaze, her professional mask completely set aside. No, it's not just about the job. These past months, watching you work, seeing your dedication to Emma, understanding what you've overcome, I've developed feelings I wasn't expecting, feelings that complicate our professional relationship in ways I'm still trying to navigate. Her honesty stripped away the final pretense between them. This wasn't simply a CEO recognizing talent in an unusual place. This was a woman drawn to a man who had entered her life when she was at her most vulnerable, who had seen her as a person rather than a position, who had offered help without agenda or expectation. People will talk. Michael voiced the reality they both understood. They'll say, I'm using you for career advancement. They'll say you're having some kind of crisis after your illness. They'll question your judgment and my motives. Alexandra's smile held a hint of the steely determination that had built her company. People always talk. The question is whether we give their opinions power over our choices. When I was dying, I promised myself that if I survived, I would stop living by others' expectations. That includes the board, my father, and anyone else who thinks they know better than I do what will make me happy. The city lights sparkled below them, a constellation of human activity spread across neighborhoods that range from privileged enclaves to working-class communities like Michael's own. Two worlds that rarely intersected in meaningful ways, separated by invisible barriers of opportunity and expectation. Yet here they were, finding connection across that divide, discovering that human bonds could form despite, or perhaps because of, their different paths. I need to think about Emma. Michael's primary concern remained constant, his daughter's well-being the fixed point around which all other considerations revolved. Any major change in my life affects her first and foremost. Alexandra nodded, respecting this priority without question. Of course. Take whatever time you need. The position will remain open regardless of what you decide about. She gestured between them, acknowledging the personal dimension of their situation. About us. Those are separate decisions, Michael. I want to be clear about that. The distinction was important, a recognition that his professional value wasn't contingent on personal involvement, that her respect for his capabilities existed independently from her growing feelings. It spoke to her integrity, to her understanding of the power dynamics at play, to her determination to give him genuine choice rather than implicit obligation. As the evening ended, Alexandra walked him to the elevator, the moment thick with unspoken possibilities. In another context, with different histories and positions, this would be the natural moment for a first kiss, a physical acknowledgement of mutual attraction. Instead, Michael extended his hand, offering a gesture that respected the complexities of their situation while acknowledging the connection between them. Alexandra took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she held it briefly between both of hers, a touch that conveyed affection without presumption, that recognized boundaries while expressing hope that they might eventually be bridged. Thank you for tonight, for honest conversation, for seeing me as Alexandra rather than the CEO. I could say the same. Michael smiled, struck by the mirror image nature of their gratitude. Thank you for seeing me as Michael, not the janitor who happened to have a useful remedy. The elevator doors closed between them, physically separating them once more. But something had fundamentally changed, a connection established that transcended professional roles and social divisions. Whatever came next would be built on this foundation of mutual respect and growing affection, of seeing and being seen beyond the labels society assigned. 2 weeks passed, filled with final research protocols in preparation for Michael's potential transition to division director. He immersed himself in the technical aspects of the role, avoiding the more personal dimensions of Alexandra's offer. The professional opportunity was clear, a dream position that would utilize his medical knowledge while providing for Emma's future. The personal complications were far less straightforward, laden with questions about perception, power dynamics, and the long-term viability of a relationship that crossed such significant social boundaries. Alexandra respected his need for space, focusing their interactions on work-related matters, while the unspoken question hovered between them. The research team continued refining Novaderm's applications, with Martha Wilson's weekly visits becoming a highlight for the scientists, who had developed genuine respect for her traditional knowledge. The formal announcement of the new research division had generated excitement throughout Harrington Biotech, though speculation about its leadership remained a source of hallway conversation. The turning point came unexpectedly during a Saturday afternoon when Michael took Emma to the Boston Children's Museum. They were exploring an exhibit on human anatomy, Emma asking endless questions about hearts and lungs and how blood moves through the body. When Michael spotted Alexandra across the exhibit hall, she hadn't seen them yet, focused instead on a young girl in a wheelchair, kneeling to speak with her at eye level rather than standing above her. "Daddy, look!" Emma tugged at his hand, having spotted Alexandra as well. "It's your friend. Can we say hi?" Before Michael could respond, Emma had broken free, darting across the exhibit hall with the impulsiveness of a 4-year-old. He followed quickly, arriving just as Emma proudly announced their presence. "Miss Harrington, we're learning about blood cells." Alexandra looked up, surprise giving way to genuine pleasure at seeing them. Emma, what a wonderful coincidence. Are you enjoying the museum? The child launched into an enthusiastic description of everything they had seen so far, while Michael observed Alexandra's interaction with his daughter. There was nothing performative in her interest, no calculated attempt to win favor with Emma to influence his decision. She listened with authentic engagement, asking questions that delighted Emma with their seriousness, treating the child's excitement as worthy of full attention. "What brought you to the museum on a Saturday?" Michael asked when Emma paused for breath. Alexandra gestured toward the girl in the wheelchair, who had moved on to another exhibit with her family. "Harrington Biotech sponsors an accessibility program here. I try to visit regularly to see how the funding is being used, to hear directly from the families what's working and what could be improved." It was a side of Alexandra that the business press never captured, the woman behind the executive title, who cared enough to spend her Saturday ensuring that children with disabilities had equal access to educational experiences. This wasn't corporate social responsibility as a marketing strategy. It was genuine commitment to making a difference in individual lives. "Would you like to join us for the rest of our visit?" The invitation slipped out before Michael could analyze its implications. "Emma would love to show you her favorite exhibits." Emma's enthusiastic confirmation left no room for polite refusal. Alexandra accepted with visible pleasure, falling into step beside them as Emma led the way to the bubble room. For the next 2 hours, they explored the museum together, their focus entirely on Emma's delight and discoveries. To casual observers, they might have appeared to be any family enjoying a weekend outing, a fact that struck Michael with unexpected force, offering a glimpse of a possible future he hadn't allowed himself to envision. As the afternoon progressed, Emma's energy began to flag, her excitement giving way to the tiredness of a child who had experienced too much stimulation. When she asked to be carried, Alexandra responded with natural ease, lifting her onto her hip without hesitation, continuing their conversation about sea creatures as if nothing were more normal than carrying Michael's daughter. The sight of Emma comfortable in Alexandra's arms, head resting against her shoulder as they discussed whether octopuses could solve puzzles, crystallized something in Michael's perception. This wasn't a CEO calculating an advantage or a woman playing at domesticity. This was simply Alexandra, connecting with a child she had come to care about, stepping naturally into a role that had nothing to do with corporate hierarchy and everything to do with human bonds. When they eventually left the museum, Emma sleepy but satisfied, Alexandra's car service waiting to take them home, the decision Michael had been struggling with for weeks suddenly seemed clear. The complexities remained, the professional considerations, the social disparities, the potential for misinterpretation. But underlying them was a simple truth. He and Alexandra had found something genuine in each other, a connection worth pursuing despite the obstacles. "I've made my decision." Michael spoke quietly as Emma dozed against his shoulder in the back of the car. "About the position, about everything." Alexandra's expression remained carefully neutral, giving nothing away of her hopes or fears regarding his choice. "I'm listening. I want the job. I believe in what the division can accomplish, in bringing traditional knowledge into modern medicine. I think I can lead that effort effectively." Michael paused, gathering courage for the more personal aspect of his decision. "And I want to explore what's developing between us, not because of the position, but despite it. Because over these past months, I've come to care for you in a way I haven't cared for anyone since Sarah died." Alexandra's composure wavered slightly, relief and joy breaking through her professional control. "The board meeting to approve your appointment is Tuesday. They'll have questions about your qualifications, your lack of formal credentials. They'll imply that our personal connection influenced my judgment. Let them question." Michael's confidence had solidified, fears giving way to certainty. "We both know the truth, that this isn't about favoritism or impulse. It's about recognizing value in unexpected places, about seeing beyond conventional credentials to the knowledge and perspective that really matter." Alexandra's smile held the determination that had built her company against all odds. "Together, we'll change how medicine views traditional knowledge. And maybe, in the process, we'll challenge a few other outdated assumptions about who belongs where and what defines genuine expertise." Emma stirred against Michael's shoulder, blinking sleepily at Alexandra. "Are you coming home with us?" The innocent question held implications neither adult was quite ready to address directly. "Not today, sweetie." Alexandra's voice was gentle. "But maybe soon. For dinner. Would you like that?" Emma nodded, settling back against her father. "You can sit next to me. I'll show you my special fork." The simplicity of the child's acceptance, her unquestioning integration of Alexandra into their world, stood in stark contrast to the complex negotiations adults required. In Emma's universe, someone who cared about her and her father belonged at their table, regardless of social position or professional titles. Perhaps there was wisdom in that straightforward assessment, a truth that transcended the artificial barriers adults constructed between worlds that were never meant to remain separate. As the car approached Michael's apartment building, Alexandra reached for his hand, her touch conveying what words still struggled to articulate. "This won't be easy. My father, the board, the press, they'll all have opinions about us, about your position, about my judgment." Michael interlaced his fingers with hers, the gesture sealing a partnership that went beyond romance or professional collaboration. A shared commitment to challenging expectations, to recognizing worth beyond traditional measures, to building bridges between worlds that rarely connected in meaningful ways. The truly valuable things rarely come easily. His voice held the quiet certainty of a man who had faced loss and emerged stronger, who understood that life's most significant rewards often required courage in the face of uncertainty. But they're always worth the journey. Alexandra's eyes held a matching certainty, the determination of a woman who had defied expectations to build something meaningful, who recognized in Michael a kindred spirit despite their different paths. Together, they were embarking on something that transcended their individual stories, a partnership that honored traditional wisdom while creating something new, that respected the past while reimagining the future. The car stopped outside Michael's building, but the journey they had begun would continue, through board meetings and public scrutiny, through Emma's growing years and professional challenges, through the gradual integration of their separate worlds into a shared life built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The remedy that had initially connected them had healed more than Alexandra's physical condition. It had opened doors between worlds that should never have been separated, revealing the essential humanity that existed beyond labels and positions. As Emma reached sleepily for both their hands, creating a physical connection between the three of them, the symbolism wasn't lost on either adult. Some bridges once built changed landscapes permanently, creating passages where barriers had once seemed insurmountable. Their story was just one such bridge, small perhaps in the grand scheme of society's divisions, but significant in the lives it touched and the possibilities it represented. The remedy's true legacy would not be measured in pharmaceutical profits or scientific papers, but in these human connections, in Martha Wilson's wisdom being honored rather than appropriated, in Michael's talents being recognized beyond his circumstances, in Alexandra's company becoming a genuine force for integrating diverse forms of knowledge, and perhaps most significantly, in the simple fact of a CEO and a former janitor finding common ground where society insisted none should exist, building a relationship that honored their differences while celebrating their shared humanity.